In this video, we are going to take a detailed look at Cambridge C2 Proficiency Speaking. At the end of this video, you are going to know everything about what the different parts look like, how much time they take, as well as the best strategies for each of the sections of the exam. If that sounds good to you, well, what happens when... Give me a second. I can't remember what happens if that sounds good to you. Let me check. Okay, breathe in. If that sounds good to you, let's get started straight away. Hi and welcome to Teacher Phil, where I help people like you pass their Cambridge exam. The speaking test in C2 Proficiency is only one of 5 parts of the exam, so it counts 20% towards your overall grade. The other 4 parts of the exam are reading, use of English, speaking and listening. In the speaking test, you have to demonstrate a wide variety of skills whilst communicating with the examiner as well as another candidate, or if you happen to be in a group of 3, 2 other candidates. On top of that, you have to show that you are capable of talking about a wide range of topics, sometimes supported by written or visual stimuli and sometimes without any help. These various skills are tested in 3 parts. And you can pause the video if you want to have a closer look. During the exam, there are always 2 examiners in the room with you. The first one is called the interlocutor. That's the person that asks all the questions and is also in charge of the timing. The second person, that usually sits a little bit apart in the background, is called the assessor. This examiner is responsible for most of the marking. In C2 Proficiency Speaking, the assessor and interlocutor mark your speaking performance across 6 different criteria. The interlocutor's only job is to award you the Global Achievement Mark. I guess that makes sense, as the interlocutor has to take care of all the questions as well as the timing. The assessor, on the other hand, marks you in all the other 5 criteria. Without going into too much detail here, you should be aware of a few things when it comes to the marking criteria. First of all, you should know that there are very detailed descriptors for each criteria. So it's not just a subjective opinion that the examiners give, but they follow a set of rules, so to speak, for how to mark your performance. And secondly, it is also important to note that the different criteria are not weighted equally, as global achievement is actually worth a little bit more than the other 5 criteria. I recommend having a look either at the links below or at the QR codes that you can find here, where these things are explained in a little bit more depth. So now that we have all the basics out of the way, we can focus on the different parts or sections of the speaking test in C2 Proficiency. And once we are done with this part of the video, you understand what each of these parts look like, what the requirements are, and what you can do to score higher marks. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, part 1 of the speaking exam is a little bit like a warm-up. It is there for you and the other candidate or candidates in the exam to settle into the test and to get used to speaking in English again. That's why the topics that you are asked about are nothing too complex, but rather straightforward ideas that should be fairly easy for you to talk about. The topics include really a wide range of things, from more personal topics like your family or your friends, over things like maybe your plans for the future or past experiences, but also some questions that might ask you for your opinion on different things, or some topics where you might have to think a little bit more. Remember that this part is quite short, with only 2 minutes for pairs and 3 minutes for groups of 3. So your answers to each question don't have to be very long or elaborate. It is simply an interaction between the interlocutor and each individual candidate. So you don't need to react to anything the other candidates say, but it's just between you and the interlocutor. That also means that you don't have to expand a lot on each of your answers. But at this level, of course, you should be able to give more than just one sentence answers. But to show you a little bit better what exactly I mean, let's have a look at an example together.
So welcome to my office. We are here to watch a C2 Proficiency Speaking exam together. The two candidates are called Dirk and Annick, and I've already described to you what the different parts look like. So let's jump into part 1 straight away, and at the end of the part I will give you my thoughts.
Good morning. My name is Sally Matson and this is my colleague Jill Budgie. And your names are?
Dirk.
And Annick.
Could I have your mark sheets, please? Thank you. First of all, we'd like to know something about you. Where are you from, Dirk?
I'm from Holland. I'm from Haarlem. It's near to the west coast of Holland.
And you, Annie?
And I'm from Zurich, Switzerland.
Are you working or studying at the moment?
I'm studying at the moment. But now I'm right now taking a gap year, so obviously I'm not studying English. But.
And you?
I'm having a gap year. I finished my high school this summer and I'm going to university next summer.
Can you tell us something about your plans for the future in terms of work?
I want to become a doctor. I want to improve the health of human beings.
And Annick, what do you think you'll be doing this time next year?
Well, I'll be doing my bank internship, which takes 18 months. So next year, obviously, I'm going to be there and taking my exams probably pretty much.
Thank you.
So this is already the end of part 1. As you can see, it's just a little warm-up. A few questions about yourself, nothing too concerning, but of course we can already see certain things that are definitely notable. So I think Dirk gives fairly short answers. Maybe he's a little bit nervous at the beginning, which is normal, yeah. But he also uses some good expressions. Yeah, he says, "I want to improve the health of human beings." So there is already some good language in there, but I think he could expand a little bit on his answers. But I attribute that to maybe his nerves at the beginning of the exam. Annick, on the other hand, seems to be a little bit more confident, and from the beginning, she demonstrates that she has a slightly larger toolbox in terms of language. So she talks about her gap year, and she uses a good structure where she says, "I'll be doing my bank internship." So she uses a future continuous form there, and you can already see she feels a little bit more confident, and from the beginning uses a bit better language. But I think for both of them, this is an okay start, and I will see you again for part 2 very shortly.
Part 2 is where C2 Proficiency becomes quite different from other Cambridge speaking exams. When we look at another example in a moment, you will see that there are quite a lot of familiar elements if you know something about, for example, B2 First or C1 Advanced. But they are arranged in a different way, and there is definitely a lot more flexibility required from the candidates. It is like a mix of parts 2 and 3 in the other Cambridge exams, and I know that might sound a little bit complicated, but give me a second and follow me here. In this part, the interlocutor gives the candidates one or several photographs, then chooses one or two of them, and the candidates have to have a discussion based on a specific question. For this first phase of part 2, the candidates have about 1 minute. You need to show that you can interact well with others, use a range of language to talk about the different pictures and the topic, react to and give your opinion on the topic given by the interlocutor, as well as manage the discussion with the other candidate or candidates. It looks a lot like part 2 in, for example, B2 First or C1 Advanced, where you also have to talk about different pictures, but in C2 Proficiency, you have to do it together with the other candidate or candidates. As soon as phase 1 is done, the interlocutor describes a situation and again gives a specific task to the candidates. This time they need to talk about all of the pictures that they received at the beginning of part 2. In this phase, the candidates have 3 minutes to talk about this specific question. The focus shifts a little bit more towards negotiating towards an outcome and trying to make a decision together. Again, I've already talked way too much, and it's always better to see a practical example. So let's go back to Aniek and Dirk and let's see how they deal with part 2 in the exam.
So welcome back for part 2. So we've already discussed how this part works, and yeah, let's see how Aniek and Dirk do in this part of the test.
Now, in this part of the test, you're going to do something together. Here are some pictures of different situations. First, I'd like you to look at pictures A and D and talk together about the sounds you might hear in these situations. You have about a minute for this, so don't worry if I interrupt you.
Okay, on picture A you can see, I think, some kind of jungle with chimpanzees.
Yes.
So I guess there are a lot of natural sounds, like leaves moving and maybe some water, maybe there's a river nearby.
And maybe the roaring of the chimpanzees as well.
Yeah, or gorillas, I don't know, some kind of
the
apes.
wind, yeah.
And yeah, maybe also some birds, because
Yes,
there are going to be a lot of birds.
definitely, yeah.
And what other animals could there be? Well, just
Yeah.
different kind of insects
don't-
maybe as well.
Yeah, but I don't think you hear them a lot. And
Yeah,
about D,
depends.
I think the splashing of the water, definitely, of the sea. And maybe the sound of the rolling plastic objects.
Yeah, but I don't think you hear any people because it doesn't
No.
look so nice there. So I think it's going to be pretty
Yes.
much silent there.
Thank you. Now look at all the
Okay, I'll just stop it there for a second. So this is the first phase of part 2, where you discuss a couple of these pictures for about a minute with your partner. And I think both candidates here get off to a good start for part 2. They use a lot of good vocabulary that is appropriate to the topic they are discussing. Yeah, they're talking about these different sounds. Aniek seems to take control of the conversation a little bit. So Dirk still looks like he's a little bit nervous, but let's see how they continue in this part. I think it's a good start for them for part 2. And now they get to the second phase, which is of course a little bit longer. Let's see how they do.
pictures. I'd like you to imagine that an environmental organisation is planning a poster campaign to raise public awareness of environmental issues. Talk together about the environmental issues suggested by these images. Then decide on an image for the poster which would be most effective in raising public awareness. You have about 3 minutes to talk about this.
I will stop again at this point because I think you see how much information the candidates have to process here. So the interlocutor just gives them this enormous task where they explain a situation, they just give them the task and the question without giving them any sort of visual stimulus, like a written question or anything like this. So if you are used to that from perhaps your B2 first or C1 advanced exam, be prepared that in C2 even more visual stimuli are removed, and you really have to listen very carefully to what the interlocutor says so that you don't misinterpret the task and you'll be able to do it well with your partner. So if you need to check out the instructions again, feel free to jump back and listen to it one more time, but we'll jump into the task itself and let's see what our candidates have to say.
I think the environmental issue in the first photograph is about the extinction of
Animals.
animals.
Lots of
Yes,
species.
yes,
Yeah, but you cannot really see that they're not doing well. It looks like a
yeah,
typical calendar picture, or
yeah,
it doesn't
definitely.
too bad. So I don't think this is a suitable picture.
They're
Picture
having
B.
the good life in there.
Yeah,
It seems like.
they look happy with
yeah.
the baby on the back. And
Yes. What do you think about B?
B, I also don't think it's that suitable for the campaign because I don't think it makes a big change for the awareness of the people if they see the picture, because they probably won't connect it to pollution or deforestation or anything. The only thing here is like the plastic cup, or I don't know, maybe it's a glass.
Yeah, maybe it's the
So
pollution
you can
of water.
reuse it, yeah. Because this is obviously like, I think,
Yes.
frizzy water, like filtered water
Yeah, I
from a
know.
spring. So I also don't think this is
No.
suitable.
I don't think either.
Picture
I think
C.
C, yeah, is a rather good one. You see all the. It's a third world country, a developing country. Certainly.
Yeah, and you can also see in between all the forest parts. So maybe there was a lot of deforestation going on before, so they could build houses.
Yeah.
So this would be, I think, one of the better pictures for the
Yes,
campaign,
definitely.
because you can see that there's been some deforestation.
Yes. I think
And
these
probably
are
also
good
then
one.
loss of species, because the animals don't have their normal habitats
Yeah,
anymore.
because all the trees.
Yeah,
Yeah, they cut down all the trees. I think D is a good one as well.
yeah, I agree.
It's a common picture.
Because normally beaches are supposed to be nice and families want to spend their time there or go for a stroll. And if it looks like this, I'm pretty much certain that
Yeah.
no one wants to go there. So this would raise awareness.
It looks like such a
The environment.
well-known white beach with the light blue water, but it's all
Yeah, but to
polluted
be honest,
by
pretty much every
plastic
beach
and everything.
looks kind of similar nowadays, because everyone's just throwing away their
Yeah.
Coca-Cola cans, and
Yeah.
so it's quite common.
But it's very hard to make all litter bins on all beaches.
Yeah.
What do you think about E?
Well, it looks like I don't really connect it with environment, because they're just old used cars that are being compressed.
Yeah. Maybe they
And there are
use
whole
the metal
parks for
again.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also I wouldn't use it for the campaign.
No, I think.
So I think we choose D.
D. Yeah, it's the best one definitely, and I think E. It's really bad because you can use metal again. You can recycle it. And
Yeah. And D actually affects the people.
Yes.
So
Definitely.
Thank you.
All right, so that is the second phase of part 2, in which, as you could see, the candidates have more time to discuss this topic, in this case of an environmental campaign, in more detail. And I would say that the two of them do a decent job here. I think Dirk wakes up a little bit. He uses some really good vocabulary, describing, for example, the sounds in the first phase of the task. But I think still he could give slightly longer contributions whenever it is his turn to speak. Anik, on the other hand, and I think that's in part because she gives longer contributions, she simply gives herself the opportunity to include more vocabulary and grammar. So she demonstrates a wider range, which obviously can impress the assessor more. But I have to say their communication between each other is pretty good. They link their contributions to what the other candidate says before them. The only thing to criticize here, in my opinion, is that Anik sometimes just talks over Dirk, which I think is a little bit of like bad form. And you should always, of course, let your partner finish before you speak or before you ask them a question. So I think she could improve on that. But I guess their part 2 in general works quite well, especially in terms of how they work together. And also, I think, especially in terms of the vocabulary that they use to describe the different sounds in the first phase, and also when they talk about the other pictures. So I think that's really good, and I think they do a decent job in part 2. And in C2 Proficiency, we only have one part left. So let's go back to the living room. I'll introduce you to part 3, and then I will see you back here at the office for the practical example.
Part 3 is the last section of the speaking test in C2 Proficiency. As we've just seen, part 2 looks like a combination of different parts of other Cambridge exams. But part 3 is where this test really becomes different. Once again, there are several phases to this part. And I guess the easiest way for us is to go through them one by one. To begin with, one of the candidates gets a card with a question on it and a few prompts which they may or may not use in their answer. They have to talk for about 2 minutes on their own, showing that they can answer the question in a structured and logical way using appropriate vocabulary as well as a range of grammatical structures. Once the 2 minutes are up, the interlocutor asks the other candidate a follow-up question about what their partner has just said and starts, we could say, a mini discussion between the two candidates. Of course, it's very important to listen carefully to what your partner says in their long turn, because as I said, the interlocutor is going to ask you a follow-up question about what they've just said. Of course, the same process is then repeated with the roles reversed, and then we can move into the third phase. Lastly, and this is a little bit like part 4 in other Cambridge exams, the interlocutor tries to deepen the conversation on one of the topics from earlier by asking a few more questions and by encouraging a discussion between the two candidates. This part can take up to 4 minutes, depending on how much time is left in each individual test. Again, it is really important in this phase to listen carefully to what your partner has to say, as you will need to link your own contributions to what they say. You also have to show agreement or disagreement and of course express your opinions in an appropriate way, supporting them with all the necessary information. Of course, once again, a practical example is better, and we still have this last part left in our video with Annick and Dirk. So let's go back one last time to my office and let's see how they do in this last part of their test.
Okay, and we're already back for the last time here at the office for part 3 of Annick and Dirk's speaking exam. You will see that this part is quite a bit different from other speaking exams in the Cambridge English system. So let's have a look at the first candidate. I think Dirk is going to start, but let's see how he does. And after his turn, we're going to stop. I'll give my feedback and then we'll look at Annick.
Now, in this part of the test, you're each going to talk on your own for about 2 minutes. You need to listen while your partner is speaking because you'll be asked to comment afterwards. So, Dirk, I'm going to give you a card with a question written on it, and I'd like you to tell us what you think. There are also some ideas on the card for you to use if you like. All right? Here's your card. Please let Annick see your card. Remember, Dirk, you have about 2 minutes to talk before we join in.
How important is it to make long-term plans? I think in personal life it's quite important to make long-term plans because you're able to know what you want to become when you're old and what you want to earn for money and what you want to do for the community, for your country. I think in talking in shorter terms, it's good to know what you want to do this year. It's long term as well, but it's shorter term. In work, school, it's really for yourself important to know what you want to do after school, so you have good grades in certain subjects. So that you will be able to show other people after school that you like the things that you're good in. In government, it is of course very important to make long-term plans. if we look at the whole euro crisis, now they all didn't make such good plans to see if the credibility of the countries was right before they entered the euro. So it's really important to look to certain aspects in part of the community in government.
Thank you. Why do some people prefer not to plan ahead?
Well, some people want to be spontaneous, and I also think that's actually a quite good idea to sometimes just say, let's pack a suitcase with, let's say, a bikini and some trousers, and then let's go to the airport and just pick one flight wherever it takes us. So I think this is also quite good. But I think when it comes to important things like planning a family, it's very important that you plan ahead to have a good job so you're financially stable. So it depends. You cannot always be spontaneous.
What do you think?
I think it's for most people just laziness not to make long-term plans. I think they don't want to think about it, and that's the reason they don't think about it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, I'll stop it at this point. So this is, you could say, the first part of part 3 with the first candidate, Dirk, getting his long turn. And you can see 2 minutes is quite a long time to talk about a topic that you haven't prepared anything for. But I do believe that he does a decent job here, because I think in his answer he structures his thoughts quite well, and he uses the prompts on the card, which is, generally speaking, a pretty good idea. You can use these ideas and turn them into almost a mini essay, where you could give a little introduction at the beginning, where you say a few general things about the question on the card, in this case, making long-term plans. After that, you can look at these 3 ideas and give a little bit of information on each. And then to finish, of course, you can sum everything up and give a short conclusion, which he didn't get to the conclusion, but he followed the prompts on the card, which can definitely be helpful. And it helped him develop his thoughts quite well. I also think that he used quite good vocabulary and grammar here, probably because he was able to speak for a longer time for the first time in the test, and he showed that he is capable of using more complex structures and a wider range of vocabulary as well. So I think that was a good long turn. And then the follow-up question that the candidates have to discuss. First, Aniek gives her a view here. She makes some good arguments talking about certain situations in which making spontaneous decisions could be more fun or better. For example, if you go on holiday and you just want to spontaneously choose a destination. And I believe Dirk's answer or response is also pretty good, where he says for him it's a sign of laziness in a way if somebody doesn't make long-term plans, if it's outside of these situations like traveling, where being spontaneous is not a big problem. So a good first part of part 3. And so let's see how they go with the roles reversed with Aniek in the long turn.
Now, Aniek, it's your turn to be given a question. Here's your card. Please let Dirk see your card. Remember, Aniek, you have about 2 minutes to tell us what you think, and there are some ideas on the card for you to use if you like. All right?
Yeah. What factors will influence how cities develop in the future? That's a very good question, because I think because of the rising population nowadays, that's very important right now to think about the future. So when it comes to population, we can definitely see that there's going to be more people in one city. So probably they have to build more houses, higher houses, build more skyscrapers. People are going to live in much smaller spaces. And also I think the living standard is going to get a bit down, because you probably won't be able to have a garden and your own house. You will just share a small flat, probably in the big cities. Also, you have to deforest forests in order to make space for buildings. So I think the cities are just going to get more packed with buildings, and the nature or the sceneries are going to suffer from that. And financially, well, they could develop in different ways. I think everything is getting more expensive every day because the resources are getting rarer. And yeah, I think also the price of water is going to raise, and energy and the fuel, obviously. And yeah, just like things like petrol. And climate, well, we're experiencing global climate changes, global warming. But I think not every city is affected so far. So probably in the jungles or like rainforests, the seasons are not really going to change because they're always at the equator. But other cities, like, not really cities, but let's say the Antarctica, I think all the ice shelves are going to melt at some point, and then just the animals are going to suffer, and also the people there.
Thank you. Is it important to preserve old buildings in cities?
I think so, because if you want to have the old scenery that we had in the early days, many people used to are usually looking back to the good life. Many old people, and I think it's really good to preserve those buildings, to have the old scenery in the cities.
What do you think?
I agree, but I also think that they're a very important part of the culture of the city. So let's look at England. If I think of England, I always think automatically of red brick buildings and very charming small houses. So if we wouldn't have them in a few years anymore, I don't think England would have any charm left. So it's all about the flair, and I think you really should preserve them.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the second part of part 3 with the roles swapped. And I guess my thoughts are very similar to the other round. I think Annick, just like Dirk, does well following the prompts on the card, which help her organize her thoughts and give a very structured answer. I think she does that very well. She also develops her thoughts well based on that. In their mini discussion that they have there, again, very similarly to the first try, Dirk gives a good answer with good arguments to start that discussion, and Annick responds well, linking her answer to what Dirk says before her. And so yeah, I think both of them do quite well in this phase of part 3. And so now we enter the last phase with a more open discussion. And yeah, let's see how they do in that part as well.
Now, to finish the test, we're going to talk about the future in general.
So I'll just stop there so you can see here that the interlocutor chooses one of the two topics. In this case, the future, where they talked about earlier about the future of cities. And now she says we're going to talk about the future in general. So the interlocutor typically takes one of the topics and then asks some questions to go into a little bit more depth. So yeah, let's see what the first question is.
Do you think newspapers and books have a future?
Yes, I think so. Some people say that the internet is going to take over everything, and that you're going to read all the articles now on iPads, on e-booklets, or what are they called?
Kindle.
Kindle, exactly. But I think it's still nice to have an actual newspaper in your hand, a physical one that you can touch, and just also the smell of the paper. So.
Yeah, and I think the sound of flipping a page is so good, and most people don't like it to read from a screen because their eyes get tired. But I think it's much better to read from a paper. It's more quiet, more just relaxing for your eyes.
Yeah.
Given the choice, would you rather live in the past or in the future?
I I think I would rather live in the past because it's a much better life. I think less worried, and there are so many issues they're complaining about, and old people, everybody is just thinking about problems that are not real problems, in my view. And I think in the early days they didn't have the time to worry about those problems. So I think I would rather live in the past.
Yeah, I also think it's very tempting to live, let's say, in the Roman times, because they had like a lot of feasts and yeah, it's just also the food, enjoying the food, going to not parties but all the celebrations there. I really think that it's going to be not easier to live there because you don't have all the technology, of course. But as he pointed out, I think that nowadays we worry about too many small things, and back then it was just war or not war, and starve or not starve, and the diseases they had back then. Okay, of course now we have the medical advantages, so we don't have to worry about the pest or I don't know.
Yeah, but we're worrying about things that are not.
But it also would be nice to like be one day in the future, where you have like everything automatically and. Yeah, just not to actually live there, but just to experience and see how it is.
How will you enjoy yourself if everything is done by something else?
Well, we don't know how the future is going to be like, so maybe you have like cyber jets and you can fly, and I think this would be fun.
Could be.
Could be.
Some people worry that wild animals will only exist in zoos in the future. What do you think about this?
Well, I hope not.
No.
But right now it seems like many species are going to be extinct in hundreds of years. But I think humankind should try to do their best in preserving them. And maybe keeping them in zoo as well is helping to preserve them, because they don't lose their habitat there, but still it's not real wildlife.
Yeah, but I think it's better to have certain reservates to keep the animals and to have the wildlife as well in there. It's much better for the animals, I think, than in a zoo. I think all the animals are so bored by always the same thing in the
in a
zoo.
small cage.
Yes.
What changes might there be in food and food production in the future?
Well, I'm still waiting for the invention of like a small pill where you can have like a starter, a main course and a dessert. They would change flavors. It would be very nice, no? Then you don't have to take all the time in eating it, and you have the same enjoyment. But still, it also wouldn't be the same. Like actually cutting a nice piece of steak, it's better than just taking a tablet. But
I think we will always eat vegetables, but I think there will be a change in maybe the food coming from snack bars and fast food brands.
But I also think that more food is going to be organic in the future.
Definitely.
Thank you. That is the end of the test.
Okay, so there we are. So you can see not a lot of questions are necessary if the candidates have such a nice open discussion with each other. So I think both of them do this very well. Yeah, they are not afraid of giving their opinion, to show their agreement, or in many cases here disagreement as well. And I think both of them do a very good job here interacting. Again, as I mentioned before, they talk over each other sometimes, which they definitely could avoid. But yeah, the interaction still is one of the stronger points here, I guess. I also think that that Dirk shows really his best contributions here in part 3. Not only in the open discussion, but also when he has his individual long turn, or when he can respond to Annick's long turn. And he really shows that he is at the right level to take C2 Proficiency. And Annick doesn't stand back in this respect, and she shows throughout the whole exam her level of English, her grammar, her vocabulary, and I think overall she might edge out Dirk here, but for that, of course, there will also be a link to the video and to the examiner's comments in the description below. So you can either click there, or you can also scan the QR code here in the corner of the video. And let's go back to the living room to finish this off and to summarize the speaking exam of Annick and Dirk.
Thank you for watching the video until the end. I hope it will give you some insight on how the speaking test in C2 Proficiency works. We've looked at some theory as well as some practical examples, so I hope you can take away some useful tips and tricks for your own speaking practice. If you want, I can also be your teacher. I offer online classes as well as writing feedback. And you can check out a lot of useful links either in the description box below or by clicking one of the QR codes that you can see on screen right now. And of course, I see you in the next video.